Maritime Matters is brought to you live by Bahamas Maritime Connection.
What is maritime?
Maritime, simply put, relates to navigation or commerce on the high seas.
Some say money makes the world go round. I say ships move the money that make the world move.
Who navigates those large international ships?
How often are international ships required to be surveyed and inspected?
Maritime also protects our seas and borders by way of our local Bahamas Defense
It is
Force.
very sad to say that out of 1,500 plus ships that are registered under the Bahamian flag, only a very small amount of Bahamians are employed.
Maritime Matters.
Hey, guess what today is? Well, you know today is Tuesday. Oi! And it's time for Captain Glenn. Turn your radio on. So everyone, let's gather around. Cause Maritime Matters. He's a native of Andros. Say what? But he grew up in Nassau. Sail around the Bahamas, all around, with the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. Hey! Well, you know today is Tuesday. Oh yeah, and it's time for Captain Glenn. Let's do any boy. So everyone, let's gather around your radio. Cause Maritime Matters. Hey, well you know today is Tuesday. Say what? And it's time for Captain Glenn. So everyone, let's gather. Cause Maritime Matters.
Maritime Matters. Pleasant good evening to you, our valued listening audience. Welcome one, welcome all. Welcome to Maritime Matters. Well, you know today is Tuesday. Boy, one day I can catch up with CBS and I can be able to handle it just like him. Boy, that sound good, eh? My. I am your host, Captain Glenn Bain. Our producer for our show tonight is the great one, the maestro himself, Mr. Kishno Jones. That's the man, ladies and gentlemen. He got it. He got everything going on the wheels of steel. We're coming to you live via Love 97 FM studio. This is Tuesday, the 3rd of June, 2026. This is Maritime Matters. We encourage that if you are driving and tuning in with us, please do so cautiously and ensure to take your time in getting wherever it is you are trying to get safely. As the saying goes, drive to arrive alive. Our sponsors for tonight's show are 101 Pharmacy and also Island Care Pharmacy up there in Freeport. We are secondly sponsored by Bahamas Maritime Connection Limited, and at BMC we provide a full slate of maritime security services. Good night to my good Auntie May up there all the way in our second city of Freeport. Good night to you, Auntie May. And you know, Auntie May is 93 years old, people, and going strong. Continue to do your thing, Annie Mae. And you know, we're waiting and looking for you to get over this big 100 century hurdle. And we know you can do it. So my money on you, Annie Mae. And I got plenty money on you. Because I know you're a strong South Andros woman who is going to pull this through for South Andros. For us South Androsians. Because we want to follow in your wake. So you just keep doing your thing, Annie Mae. You keep doing your thing. And that's our number one fan of Maritime Matters, people. Tonight, we are going to be engaging discussions surrounding the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. As it was yesterday, compared with it is today. Discussion surrounding this hot topic And we just continuing this because last week we kick it off, but boy, we run out of time. Quick, right? And then I know some of you all who from Defense Force wanted to hear last week, and you all hear about it. And now you can listen to it this week as you drive home. And those who are home already, go and turn your TV to what the channel is, 971. 971, Love 97. Right? Turn the cable to 971 and listen to us live as we talk about the Defense Force, past and present. And we get a little deep. There's a lot of people who know how the Defense Force really got off the ground, eh? And then a lot of people don't know how things change so much from the original intent by way of nepotism, by way of favoritism, by way of people just not being professional. And I know a lot of it because I live some of it. And I'm prepared to really go too deep into what I live personally. It's the same about me. This is about knowing where we are and try and figure out a way to get back where we're supposed to be. And I speak to, well, I can't speak to Commodore Leo Swinley because he's passed and gone. May his soul rest in peace. I can't speak to Commodore Belton. He's British. We don't know if he's alive and still with us. But again, who knows how to reach Commodore Belton? I can't speak to Commodore Leon Smith because Commodore Smith is past and gone, and may his soul continue to rest in peace. I can't speak to Commodore Davy Roll because he's still alive, kicking and all around, and I see him all the time, right? Davy Roll is a young fellow like me. And so we can speak to him a bit because he knows this stuff better than I do. We can speak to Commodore Clifford Butch Scavello because, of course, that's a good friend of mine, and he's still among us. And he may not be 100%, but he's doing very well. And he would have handed on the baton to Commodore Roderick Bowe, who is up and going and alive and kicking. And of course, these are the men that knows the Defense Force inside out. They know exactly what happened on their watch. They know what happened before their watch. They know what happened after their watch. And they would be people that I wish they could just call in and say something about where we are now as compared to where we were then, as compared to where we supposed to be. Because that's what this is all about, right? And of course, from Ronnie Boat would have been Commodore Tellis, Andy Bethel. Yeah, I call his middle name because that's how well he and I are very, very, could be like brothers. Now me and Tellis closer than me and all other Commodores in the past, right? Because we shared space in the same vessel. As a matter of fact, I trained under Tellis. Tellis was my first, he was my first captain. Jackson Ritchie was my first captain. Tellis and I work on them. He was the XO and I was the NAVO. So he trained me how to navigate the Bahamian waters, right? He trained me because he and I worked even later. He came back as commanding officer and I was his XO. So he relied on me heavily. He made sure I knew how to do things the way they should be. And I owe a lot to Tellis Bethel, right? And I say this because these are facts. These are facts. And so Tellis would have been there a few months ahead of me. And he would have even been there after me. So, and he would serve as Commodore and know from whence we came, where we came from, where we are, where we should be going, etc., etc. So I wouldn't be surprised if Tellis called tonight and say, boy, Glenn, it wasn't quite like that, or this the way it really was, or yeah, you're absolutely right, and we should have done better, or we couldn't do any better because of this or because of that. And that's what this whole show is all about. We want to discuss the details as to how we can improve. If you don't know where you come from, how you going to know where you're going? Right? And of course, after Tellis, the baton would have been passed on to my good friend, Commodore Raymond King. And of course, Raymond and I, we go way back. We used to serve on the same ship when I was the captain. He and I would have had engaged discussions and meetings about how we can move the Defense Force forward. And in my opinion, Raymond is the person, right, that really looked at it from a perspective of improvement. Raymond looked at it from a perspective of how are we gonna grow this force and continue this force and have the right trajectory, right? Because he and I talk a lot of ideas and he wanted to do a lot of things. Well, of course, he didn't have that opportunity to fully engage what he wanted to do. So Raymond, feel free to call in, my brother. And of course, nowadays we got Commodore Floyd Moxie, who has been there in the trenches from the days shortly after I joined. I think Floyd would have joined shortly after me. And he and I would have known each other very well, still know each other very well. A very good, you ain't gonna find a better gentleman than Floyd Moxie, right? And he's now in the chair. So Floyd, we speak to you, my friend. We speak to you. We speak to you about what are some of the things that can be done with this force, even now, to bring the right trajectory, to improve this force to the state of where we really needed to go and wanted to go as the best little navy in the world. Oh, let me tell you something. That, my friend, is a tall order. But I have faith in my friend Floyd. And I think if given an opportunity to know and galvanize the approach with those who can assist in getting the defense force where it really needs to go, Floyd is our man. So Floyd, I got it on you, brother. And you can feel free to call my the show as well and express. You have recently taken over the chair, so you would see some things that you probably didn't know about. You would have seen some things that you figure, boy, we could do something with this. So feel free to call in and tell us where you think this force need to go. And for all of you that served within the Royal Bahamas Defense Force are still around and continue to listen to the show, please feel free to call in, because you would have experiences that you would have thought, if we didn't do that, I think we would have had a better force. If we were to do this, I think, hey, Glenn Bain ain't got the answers. I may have one or two. And I may be wrong in my trajectory in one or two. So I need y'all, all of y'all, because I know plenty of y'all out there listening, to call in and say, where did we go wrong? What do we need to do to get in the right trajectory to become the best little navy in the world? Because we have the potential. All we have to do is set it up right and do some things. We have to exercise some tough love, and we can get this force. We were never on the right trajectory as far as I'm concerned. And I can tell you why I think that tonight. Never. And to get on the right trajectory, we got to do some cleaning house, buddy. So, all my hard mode, let me get into it. How it all began. We're going to come back and talk some details on how this force all began, all the way back to Sir Lyndon Oscar Pinling. Back in the early 80s, early 70s, correction, shortly after independence. Sir Lyndon would have seen other countries in the region, small island nations just like us, having some coast guards and that type of thing. So why can't the Bahamas do the same? And there's a lot of kickback. This guy had a lot of kickback on independence, a lot of kickback on having a Royal Bahamas Defense. Although we already had a police force, People will say, oh, that could be Pinling Army. He only want to create an army so nobody could move him. All kind of things they were saying. All the negative things. But yet we had countries just as small as us and smaller in this nation, in this region, that had defense forces and coast guards. Why we couldn't do it? Because a lot of people just like to look at things negatively, eh? So Sir Lyndon decided, man, look here, I know I have some naysayers, but we can do this anyhow. And he did it. And he brought in a gentleman known as Commander William Swinley from the Royal Navy. And Commander Swinley drafted and put together what is anticipated to be the best little navy in the world. And, of course, we had to find men, but we already had a police patrol unit that had patrol boats and more. They're doing patrols before Swinley even came in, right, or around that time. So we had the police doing the job. But of course, as far as Sir Lyndon was concerned, yes, we have police doing the job, and we will give them an opportunity to continue it, but we could do it from a marine perspective, not a police marine perspective, but a defense force marine perspective. And the rest is history, eh? So Mr. Swinley came in and he put some things together, and he started to liaise with the other side being the police marines. They had 4 patrol 60-foot craft, and they had some senior people from the police force basically spearheading and running that setup. And then eventually there was a launch of the defense force, and we started to bring in our own Marines that trained right alongside police at the police college, and they would eventually join up with the police Marines who would have been senior people to them and people who already went out on the boats and know what it was all about. And they would have to cut grass on the base and create a base. Because, the Coral Harbor base used to be a hotel owned by, I think, some Arabs. And it was a hotel, and they still call it, and they had a big part of the hotel that was incomplete. It was almost finished, boy, but they didn't finish it. And the Coral Harbor resort it was, and they had restaurant and rooms out there and all the rest of that. So we had to convert that into a base, which we did gradually, right, with the help of some good men. And we can call some of the names tonight. And then, of course, we had, after the launch, the police and defense force merged. The police marine unit, those who wanted to sign over to remain in the defense force instead of returning to the police force because they really didn't want to be a defense force person. They joined as a police and they wanted to stay police. They had the option to stay or go, right? Most of them stayed. And most of them stayed. And they were treated, I think, very much better than if they had returned to the police force as far as promotions is concerned. Because the defense force is brand new and all the positions were wide open, eh? So they got some good stuff. And I can call some of the names and tell you what they got, right? And then we had a situation where they sent our officers off to train in England. Our officers didn't train in Nassau until years later. They went directly to Dartmouth, Britannia Royal Naval College, and trained and became officers for the defense force. And that kind of gave us a notch above the police, because the policemen that were running the patrol boats, those 4 patrol boats, most of them couldn't navigate, right? They had to depend on some navigators that were brought in from Ragged Island and places like that, who really knew how to navigate the waters, because the police wouldn't have had an opportunity to navigate no boat, but they were still in charge. They were the captains. And then eventually those navigators that they brought in, some of them became officers, police officers and defense force officers and all that. We'll talk a little bit about that, right? And as I was saying, we got some people out there that know the stuff better than me, know the stuff way better than me. And I would hope 1 or 2 of them would call in and give their views, so the public could know, boy, back in the day, this is how we started. These were the people. I can call a lot of names today, but I'm sure they'll know even more names than I would know. So there was the separation from the police force, from some of those who were transferred to the RBDF. Then shortly after, the defense force became a regulatory body based on an act of Parliament, the Defence Force Act, which came into force sometime during 1980, just before the Flamingo sink. So the Flamingo sink in May, it was been April 1980 when the Defence Force Act was brought into force, and we officially had a Royal Bahamas Defence Force. And about 2 or 3 years later, I think it would have been 1983, when Commodore Belton was replaced by the first Bahamian Commodore, Commodore Leon Smith. And the force became, as we call it, Bahamianized. But then we had some other British senior officers came in to assist in the management of the defense force, since we had a first Bahamian commander who really didn't have no real Navy experience, who didn't really have no real naval training, but he was a senior police and he ran the police. I believe he was basically second in charge of police Marines under Mr. Lawrence Major. And of course, when the transition happened, Mr. Lawrence Major decided he's going to remain with the police force. He had plenty rank. And he is not going to go on the defense force to serve under no foreigners. And that was the crux of the reason he wanted to be in charge, overall in charge. And it's hard to argue against his position, right? But he always had that option to return or maintain his police status as a very senior police. So that's how that happened. And that's how come Commodore Smith became the first Bahamian Commodore. It quite technically could have been or would have been Mr. Lawrence Major. A lot of people know that, a lot of people don't, but that's what it was, right? Mr. Major decided he's going to decline and he's going to stay with the police force. Then we had, eventually the defense force started to bring in cadets. We had recruits who were ratings training to become defense force enlisted men. And then we had cadets who came in to be trained, to be sent off to Dartmouth and become officers, and they would never be ratings, never be enlisted. They would be commissioned eventually, right? And that happened after my time, because when I came in, we didn't have that cadet system going as yet, because we were going straight off to Dartmouth to train. And once we came back, we were officers, right? So then eventually, and then those of you who've been around in the days, back in those days, we would know that a lot of nepotism kicked in. And a lot of favoritism kicked in. And a lot of senior officers who would have gone to Dartmouth and didn't want to tolerate this foolishness just fled. He said, I'm not going to be part of that. This ain't what I joined up for. Because in a way, the defense force started to look like the police force as far as who can get promoted, no matter how skillful you are, according to who you are in the eyes of those at the top and all the rest of that thing like that. And then a lot of people just left. And then a lot of us, people around my era, decided we got to find an exit strategy because this ain't working for us. Here it is, we doing everything we're supposed to do. We could do things better than just about anybody else. But when promotion come around, this one and that one get promoted, and I ain't moving. Because I'm not one of the favorites, and I ain't nobody family, and I ain't nobody at the top looking out for me, because my biggity and I falling in line with no foolishness. So, and I can say that now, and I have no shame. I'm proud to say that, because there's a lot of people just like me who were victims in a system that was simply not fair, right? And it's about time somebody start talking about these things. And the police force full of this too. And, well, the whole government full of this, let's be real, right? The entire government system. In time you see the politicians are the ones who are going to decide who's going to be promoted at the top or near the top. And the thing about it is in the regulations, in the Defense Force Act, it tells you about that any position higher than senior lieutenant. So from lieutenant commander, commander, captain. Well, we had senior commander. I don't know why we had all these foolish senior commander and acting commander and all these foolishness, right? But from lieutenant commander, commander, captain, commodore, all those positions are supposed to be based on political appointment. The politicians decide who they want to get those. They don't care who you are, how good you are, blah, blah, blah. The act tells you that it's their decision. So they ain't like they was doing nothing wrong. So you, as a defense force officer, like I was a defense force officer, I had to decide whether I about to be subjected to this. And And as bigoted as I am, I had to say no, because I don't play politics. I don't play on nobody card. I know PLP, I know FNM, I know COI, I know DNA, I none of them. Of course, my job back then and still is, like all other Bahamians should, support the government of the day. Because the government of the day is a government that overall we, the people, decided this is what we want. So it don't matter what your position was prior coming into election and who you vote for. The people, once the people make a decision on who our government is, it's our obligation, or should be our obligation, to serve the government of today. Because that's the government we, the people, put there. And whenever we decide to change the government, then people should serve the new government, because that's the government the people put there. We only get one vote. So when the collective decide it could be this one or that one, who's us to question that or query that? Or hey, come on, man, we gotta get to understand that consensus is what give us our democracy. All of us had the right to vote how we want to vote. But now when the decision is made based on the collective, we should all respect that decision. Right? Like Sir Lyndon said back in 1992, the voice of the people is the voice of God. And he said that only after saying the people has spoken. The people has spoken. You know what that means? That means collectively the people decide this is how we want to go. So Sir Lyndon say, people decide they want to go FNM. That's the voice of God. We need to respect that. And we need to understand that FNM is the government of the day, and we should give them our support. And that's kind of hard work, say. And I mean, if you have a difference of opinion on that, that's on you. But that's just the way it is. And then, so if we decide who the government will be, and our acts, the Defense Force Act and the Police Act and all the other acts around government says by political appointment to certain positions in government, who are we to question who the politicians that we the people put there decide they want to promote? To the Commissioner of Police, to the Commodore of Defense Force, to the Custom Controller, to the Director of Immigration, and all the other areas, the prison superintendent and all the rest of those things. The government decide who can get those positions. And now they didn't say they got to decide that based on years in the job, or based on performance, or based on, no, they decide that based on who they feel is going to give them the support in getting the job done efficiently and effectively. So let's get over it, people. Excuse me. Let's get over it. So the nepotism and favoritism within the Defense Force came around just like it's every other, and not only government, some private companies. Well, private companies can't be nepotism, because that's their own. But the government, ain't nobody own that. So we call it nepotism, because if the minister has a nephew and the prime minister have a niece, and they want to get their nephew and their niece to run a certain area that they work in, they can't complain. That's if they could galvanize the politicians around them, and they normally have the authority to do that, to vote that these people take over those places, that's going to happen. But it ain't happening on their watch, and they may make the right decision, who knows. But the reality is that is legal. But then you got some people in these departments and in these organizations that are near the top or at the top, and they practice the nepotism because they're the ones who decide who's going to go up to be considered. And they may select some people over some other people who they know is unfair. But the person may be someone they just like more, or the person may be somebody who's related to them down the line, and they're going to make sure we look for their own people. Or maybe somebody who did a personal favor for them even before they join the job, and they say, well, I got to look for this one work for me, right? It could be any reason. But anyway, we ain't here to talk, but yeah, we here to talk a little bit about that nepotism and favoritism, but not no, we ain't let it be no big part of our discussion, right? And the big question is this situation that we have with our Royal Bahamas Defense Force, where we're not even close to being considered as the best little navy in the world. The skullduggery that we've done to get it where it is now and why it is and how it is this irreversible? Or is this reversible? Can we reverse it and get it back online? Do we want it to be reversed? First of all, because you see, you got to have a commitment at the top. So if the Prime Minister don't want it to be reversed because he won't keep some of the people moving up the ladder because they're his cousins or they people that he does like, or they some people who support who's his general family, or whatever the case may be, right? But if the Prime Minister wanted to continue not being a fair system, then we wasting our time thinking it is reversible. And I ain't talking about the Prime Minister of the day. I'm talking about the Prime Minister of the government in power at any time. Because I have to start from the top. The Prime Minister, the Minister, the Commodore, and especially the Commodore. Because boy, let me tell you something. These Prime Ministers and Ministers, they don't be dealing with the day-to-day thing and getting on in these forces, you know. Mind you, they may pick one or two people and say, make sure that one get promoted, make sure that one get promoted. But the day-to-day thing with people who really putting out and doing well and some of them who they pushing aside because they just feel like that one is their people more and that's really from the Commodore. And you could tell based on who was Commodore at what period and who got promoted that there was a lot of favoritism and nepotism. And I could call no name, but boy, I tell you, I got plenty of names I could call. And many of you out there, y'all have plenty names y'all could call too, because y'all live it just like me, and y'all know it wasn't right. But can this be reversed, or is this irreversible in a small country like ours? So please, be sure to stay tuned as we delve into discussions on these maritime issues. We're talking maritime, people. You are listening to Maritime Matters. At this point, we move to our first break. And when we return, we should delve into further discussion surrounding these situations in our Royal Bahamas Defense Force. So listen up, people. You do not want to miss this one. Thank you.
At One-on-One Pharmacy, our friendly staff is ready to serve you. Visit us today for all your prescription and over-the-counter needs at our East Street South or Charles Saunders Highway locations. We're open Monday through Saturday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and from 9 to 4 on Sundays. In a rush? Send your refill scripts online at oneononepharmacy.com or ask about our convenient pickup service. One-on-One Pharmacy, providing personal health care with people at heart. At Bahamas Maritime Connection Limited, we offer first-class maritime security services throughout the Bahamas and the wider Caribbean. As experts in maritime security, we specialize in production of ISPS assessments and plans, verification audits, certified familiarization training, and port security consultancy, just to name a few. Our services also include provision of a security force to maintain all required ISPS facility security compliance. For all your maritime security needs, visit us today in Nassau at our East Street South location or in Freeport in the Kipling building. Call us at 392-3515 or follow us on all social media platforms. Bahamas Maritime Connection, your leader in maritime security. Let's help you make the connection.
Hey, guess what today is? Well, you know today is Tuesday. Oi! And it's time for Captain Glenn. Are you ready on? So everyone, let's gather around. Cause Maritime Matters. He's a native of Andros. Say what? But he grew up in Nassau. Sail around the Bahamas, all around with the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. Hey! Well, you know today is Tuesday. Oh yeah. And it's time for Captain Glenn. Let's go, boy. So So everyone, let's gather around your radio, 'cause Maritime Matters. Hey, well, you know today is Tuesday. Say what? And it's time for Captain Glenn.
See everybody gather, for Maritime Matters. Maritime Matters. You are listening to Maritime Tick, 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 Tick Matters. And on this show, we talk maritime. Maritime Matters is weekly. That's every week at 17:05. What's that? 5:05 p.m. every Tuesday here on Love 97 FM. The primary purpose of our show is to sensitize Bahamians of opportunities in the maritime sector. We also cover current maritime issues from the domestic and international maritime feeds. The phone number to reach us, should you wish to get in on discussions during the show, and boy, look, you'll be looking for some calls tonight. I don't want all y'all getting scared and shy, you know. Man, call in and tell us some of your experience. You've been through the force. You know time it is just like me. The number to call 322-5477 or 322-5683. That's 322-5477 or 322-5683. To hear a replay of the show or any of our previous shows, simply hit us up at any time via our YouTube page. That's Maritime Matters Bahamas. Just go to YouTube on your electronic device and type into the search box Maritime Matters Bahamas, and you will see a litany of our shows that spring into action, and you could just pick, choose, refuse. So let's talk maritime. Back to our hot topics for the day, and we're going to go all the way back up to how it all began. We talk about Sir Lyndon Pilnin bringing in Commodore Swinley. Well, first of all, he had to convince his government that this country needs a defense force. You see, everybody know that we had a police marine. Well, the people that really mattered, eh? But I don't think they realize how important it was, because of our vast archipelago, all the waters and the land, and the shores and the reef, and the fact that we were so threatened by invasion of our fishery products, invasion by drug dealers, invasion by migrants or migration, those who want to migrate to and through the Bahamas. Same thing with drugs, to and through the Bahamas. Well, fish never used to go to and through. Fish used to come, grab, and take out. Right? So those were the three major reasons why it was necessary to have a defense force. And so Lyndon wanted to do it just like they did in Jamaica, just like they did in Barbados, just like they did in Trinidad. We want to bring the British people here, the people who have navies, and you know, Mother England. We want to bring those people here and show us how to set this up, because we don't have anybody with any military background in the government system. Military, we have no military force. This is the closest we ever had to a military force, because the police is only police force. Well, only, but yeah, the police carrying on and all that. But, you know, defense force deal with much larger weaponry, right? Although we're not quite a navy, we little higher than the police when it comes to artillery and those type of things. So Lyndon thought it was a good idea. So he brought in Mr. Well, he got the blessings of his cabinet colleagues, of course. And by that time, the split has already happened with the dissident aid and all them things we talk about. Well, during independence, some of them decided they don't think the country is ready for independence. They think Sir Lyndon pushing it too fast and too hard, and they decided to split up. And this defense force thing came later, right? This came around later. And although there were detractors to the idea, they expressed their wishes, and we still ended up having the launch of a defense force. So Commander William Swinley came in and he would meet with the Prime Minister on a weekly basis to report how progress is being made. And he mapped out a plan. And he did what he had to do as far as getting some Marines into training, getting some officers to go off to Dartmouth to train, and meshing or merging with the police Marines so that we could all start preparing a defense force. And it happened. And Swinley didn't come in here on his own when defense force started. There were a good handful of Royal Naval officers seconded to the defense force or on loan to the defense force. They were still in the Royal Navy, right? And some of the names I remember, and these may not be all of them, right? But some of the names that I remember, and a lot of those who were there around the time when I was there, would remember these people as well, right? Captain Derek Matthews, he was next to Swinley. He was the captain, and he was a very, very good, I'd say very effective captain, in that most officers in the force, Bahamians, whether they were from the police force or they were Dartmouth trained officers, most of them, if not all, had a lot of respect for Captain Matthews. Excuse me. As he knew what he was doing, he was a very patient person, and he treated others with respect. So he didn't disrespect anybody, so that, they say respect goes two ways. You disrespect me, you can't expect me to respect you, right? But that's how some of our people go. We get a little bit of power, they feel disrespect people and call it that. No, don't work that way. So Captain Matthews was a strong arm, and then you had people like Lieutenant Commander Henderson, who came in to fly the plane. Lieutenant Commander North, who came to do a lot of planning and that type of thing. Lieutenant Commander Smith, who came to do the supplies, right? He was, I forget what we used to call him. Then you had Darby Allen, who came in to do the engineering. We had Lieutenant Commander Denon, I think it was. I never met that one, but he came in to do some training. And we had Lieutenant Basha, and these were some of the British officers. They were full British people. They never used to sail on our ships, but they used to prepare the force for doing patrols. They used to prepare the force. They got a lot of training and resources and improved us and this and that and the next. So when it started up, we had some assistance, right, from the Brits to keep us on the right track, because we never had a defense force before. We never had a navy before. And so the Bahamians, who were in the same level sort of thing, or on the same level with these British officers, would have been, I think, Mr. Lawrence Major at the time was assistant commissioner, or at least chief superintendent. I think he was assistant commissioner, right? And I like I said, I never met Mr. Major in the force. I never met most of these people in the force. So at the end of the day, I can only go by what I recollect, right? And we got some people who can call in today. I'm looking for you all to call and tell us, well, it was this and was that and that. Correct me a little bit and give us some information, right? So it was ACP Lawrence Major was overall in charge of the police Marines, and he would have been working closely with Mr. Swinley and Captain Matthews, and as far as trying to shape what the police Marine was to a defense force. And then it was next to Mr. Lawrence Major was I think Chief Superintendent would have been Mr. Leon Smith. I think he was Chief Superintendent when it was time to cross over to the defense force. If he wasn't, then he might have been just a superintendent. But Leon Smith would have been the next in line from the Bahamian, who were actually running the police Marines, eh? And then, of course, you had Assistant Superintendent Amos Roll, Assistant Superintendent of Police, and Amos, and again, may all of these great men's souls rest in peace, because they all started up the police marines and started up the defense force per se. And then we would have had some navigators. These would have been the people that the police brought in to navigate those 4 patrol boats. Because the police didn't have the navigators on the force, eh? And they brought in a lot of people from Ragged Island. They brought in 1 or 2 from Eleuthera. And because the only 2 that I know personally, right? Because I hear that Captain Hezron, Moxie, and a couple of those other men, may all their souls rest in peace, came in to assist the police force with navigating those vessels, and they give them ranks and whatnot. So yeah, they were there to save the situation. But the 2 that I know came over to the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, right, would have been Bachelet Lafleur and Scally Munro, and both of them would have been senior lieutenants and eventually lieutenant commanders later on in the force. And I can tell you, they were navigators. They were responsible primarily for training the Dartmouth trained officers who came in from Dartmouth, but they didn't know the waters of the Bahamas. So, and I'll tell you something, you could be the greatest master mariner captain in the world, but when you come to these Bahamian, you better get somebody to show you some things, because you will run your boat aground in no time, flat. So, thank goodness we had the Bachelet Lafleurs and the Scally Munros. And the other, his brother, because I understand a couple Munros from Ragged Island would have been getting it. Then we had Hezron and a couple other. Most of these people were from Ragged Island, and I don't know, maybe Exuma, but mainly from Ragged Island, because the Ragged Island sailors were the best. And people can argue that much as they like, right? Record is clear. So we would have had Lieutenant Commander Lafleur and Lieutenant Commander Munro there, and they would have had more rank than all of the Dartmouth trained officers when I joined. And I joined in 1981, came back from Dartmouth in 82. And at that time, when the actual launch happened for us to start getting people to be defense force officers and Marines, we had the first set of officers to go to Dartmouth. And these were great guys, I could tell you. These fellas wasn't easy. I don't know where Mr. Swinley, how Mr. Swinley was able to swing all of these fellas to go to Dartmouth, because these guys were good. Ken Turnquest and Peter Drudge, they were the first 2. And these were mainly private school people, you know. These ain't much of them been in no government school, right? I say none. A couple of them in the government school. Most of them were in private schools. And most of these people came into the defense force with the view that I have an opportunity to be the first Bahamian Commodore. Because I don't think they saw at the time that past Commodore Leon Smith and Amos Roll would have been vying for that title. Excuse me. And so that changed to, boy, yeah, I can be the first Bahamian Commodore, but I want to be the first Dartmouth trained Bahamian Commodore. That's when the rat race started, right? So we would have had Ken Turnquest and Peter Drudge, who would have been the very first 2 midshipmen to go off to Dartmouth. And they would have been followed within 3 months and very closely by my good friend Donald Weir. And I could tell you, he wasn't easy, right? So, not that Ken was easy either. All these is good people. Ken and Drudge came back, Don, Roger, and Anthony. It would have been Donald Weir would have gone alone. I know how come Don gone by himself, right? But he was hard like that. And then, following him, a couple months later, and they would have met him in Dartmouth, probably on his last or senior term, would have been Roger Roll, Anthony Allens, and Godfrey Roll. So 2 Rolls, Roger and Godfrey, and Anthony Allens. And again, these are great guys. These are the people that molded and shaped me. These are the people that I came under. These are the people I have all kind of respect for, right? Because they were just good as that. They were that good. And after those 3, this is all in my recollection now, we would have had Jackson Ritchie, the great Jackson Ritchie. I call him the great for a reason, right? Raymond Farquharson and Wilfred Sands. They would have been the next 3 going off to Dartmouth. And it followed. And you had a lot of other people like Brother Ambrister, Albert Ambrister and Patrick McNeil, and then Davy Rowland, Boyd Williams, and then Harvey Sweeting, and then James Wallace and Christopher Paclaus, and then us. So I know all these people good. These be like brothers, right? Because we live like that. We lived like that back in those days. And so we would have been the persons that would have gone straight off to Dartmouth, straight off the streets into Dartmouth, without knowing anything. You don't know how to slick your shoes. You don't know how to put your clothes and iron your clothes properly and put them neatly in the drawer. You don't know how to drive no boat. Mind you, some of us, like my friend James Wallace and them coming up out of Ragged Island, they could drive a boat before they go on to Dartmouth. Why you could sail up a boat? But you know, most of us, this is brand new to us. And then around the same time, we sent a whole heap of, we had entry 1, entry 2, entry 3, I think straight up to entry 4, trained at the police college. Right? And that's when you had all the young Marine seamen coming out, and they would be the first set of people to become, well, not the first set, but first set of people who were not previously police to become senior rates and all the rest of that. And I could call a whole litany of names because there's plenty of them. These guys were good, right? One of the things I think the Defense Force should have done and didn't do was to bring in a couple Killicks and senior rates from the Royal Navy. Just the guy that brought the officers from the Royal Navy to shape and train our Dartmouth trained officers and whatnot. They should have also bought some lieutenants and chief petty officers to come and train up our people to know how to do things from that professional eye, right? Because we had the people coming in from the police force, and I can name some of them, like David Duncombe, may his soul rest in peace, Peterson James, Paul Miller, may his soul rest in peace, Edison Yoga Rule, Milo, the Mohegan Pratt. These are people who would have been running those 4 ships in the Police Marines and doing a stellar job because that's all we had. And they would be the people that these Marine seamen coming out of training at a very young age, like you remember the Flamingo incident, would have had a whole heap of them on board, right? But they would have also had a couple senior people, some police, some senior rates and whatnot from the police force that could have steered them in the right direction. Because, you know, they ain't never been we had no naval people to train. I mean, we had no defense force people to train. I had to use the police Marines who converted into defense force Marines, and we needed that, and that was a big help. All right? Otherwise, I guess we would have had to have British people there. So the force started with these handful of great officers that went off to Dartmouth. But first of all, you had the senior personnel, the senior officers that came from the police, Marines side of things. Like I say, the Leon Smiths and Amos Rolls and Bachelet LaFleurs and Scally Munros, and then you had the mix of loaned officers on loan from the Royal Navy, Lieutenant Commander Captain Matthews North, Lieutenant Commander North, Lieutenant Commander Smith for supplies, Lieutenant Commander Sasson, well, he was just hanging around, right? Lieutenant Commander Henderson, who flew the plane, Lieutenant Commander Darby Allen, who dealt with all the engineering, Lieutenant Commander Dillon, who also did training and that type of thing, and Basha, and they would have been there to help shape our Dartmouth trained officers and some of the senior rates that came in from the police force and helping and forming the training department and all the rest of that good stuff, right? And then you start to have a little conflict between the Bahamian officers who were Dartmouth trained and the lone officers who were Dartmouth trained, because some of our Bahamian tribes are better than some of them, to be honest with you. But you know, it is what it is. But we had some growing pains, and that went on, and that went on. And then we had the actual launch of the force, where we had the police personnel have to make a decision whether they want to remain in the police Marine section which will now become the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, or they want to return to the police force and do not be a part of the defense force. And from my understanding, the majority of them came over, right? The majority of them came over. You had a good handful who didn't come over, but the majority came over. Some were radio technicians, some were electricians like Jug and them. Some were basically just seamen like the Mahagan and Lil J and them, and they kept those boats going, right? And so they came into the defense force with experience, and they were great assets to a burgeoning defense force just getting off the ground. And so as time went on, and I can get down to some nitty-gritties now, right? As time went on, we had to make a decision. Well, I don't know at what point this decision was made, but this decision must have been made between Commodore Swinley and Prime Minister Pinlan. Because this decision I'm about to talk about is very touchy, right? It's very touchy. And this show is not about trying to embarrass anybody. This show is about speaking to some of the things that if it didn't happen that way, it might have been different, or it should have been better, right? So the decision to send our officers off to Dartmouth and allow them to go through Dartmouth even if they fail, and return to the Bahamas as officers all the same, in my opinion, was the decision that caused us to not even be in the ring to be chosen as the best little navy in the world. You see, I don't think, and I will hold on to this until death, even if it was me, right? But I don't think that the standards being upheld in the Royal Navy should be lowered for Bahamians, because our little navy should be just as qualified as any navy in the world, like the Jamaican armed forces. And I keep saying Jamaican because I knew up to the point where I was training with Jamaicans, failing was not an option. If you fail as a Jamaican, you're out. You could go back as a rating or whatever, the senior rate, but you're not going to be a Jamaican Defense Force officer if you go to Dartmouth and fail. But in our force, I know in the early years, nobody was failing. Nobody was failing in the early years. Everybody was passing, right? Because we really had some powerful people. And I said, nobody failed in the early days because there was one or two who failed. But for the most part, they were all passing Dartmouth. And then as time moved on, we had more and more people failing Dartmouth. Because Dartmouth was not easy to pass. But the same Dartmouth that we went to, the British people went to, the Jamaican people went to, the Singaporeans went to, the Irish people went to, the people from Iran, saw some of them there, people from Kuwait, Qatar. That's how I know these places. Sudan, Kenya. We have people from all of these places going to Dartmouth as midshipmen and being like us. And in most cases, if they had failed, they would not be officers in their armed forces or their Navy or Defense Force or Coast Guard or whatever they're training to be. But in the case of the Bahamas, you went to Dartmouth and you failed Dartmouth. When you return home, you're still an officer. And that was kind of disheartening to accept. When you think about, you want this force to be regarded as the best little navy in the world. You see, Singapore had a force that was probably regarded as the best little navy in the world. Jamaica was close to, but Jamaica don't really, they only got one coast to patrol. One land mass to patrol. So they, like us, would get all over the place. And I can tell you, Defense Force, Bahamas Defense Force, had some really tough officers, some really strong officers, some really intelligent officers, some really professional officers passed through those ranks. And today, this day, many of them are holding strategic positions in maritime in the Bahamas, especially in Freeport. We could go on forever with that, right? But there's a lot of things we could have done to be the best little navy where it would have paid off even bigger for us, right? Because if we did some of the things like what Jamaica would have done with their officers, as far as getting them to go back to Dartmouth to do the sub-lieutenant training, getting them to go to Canada to do a lot of training, right? They would have gotten their officers to join the merchant ships, to join the international cargo ships or passenger ships, to be certified to become officer in charge of navigation watch, eventually chief mate, eventually master mariner. And they would have done that by allowing their officers time off to go and join ships and serve for periods where they had to serve, to serve sea time in order to get that status as officer of watch, chief engineer, chief mate or master. And it's, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force didn't have one person while they served. I don't know, but now, and I don't think now either, that went off and served on commercial ships to certify as an officer forming part of navigation watch, or to certify certainly not as a chief mate or master mariner, right? And that force was just bursting with potential, because any officer that passed Dartmouth, I can tell you, could have been very readily a master mariner, could have been very readily a hotshot lawyer, very readily a good doctor. Anything, CPA, you name it. If somebody could go to Dartmouth and pass Dartmouth in those days without being pre-trained, the sky was the limit. There's nothing that person couldn't do. And I can tell you this because I live it. And it was hard to pass Dartmouth. But I don't want the show to be about Dartmouth. I want to show about the Defense Force and making the Defense Force a potentially sound place, so that when officers' senior rates and ratings are getting out of the Defense Force on retirement, a whole heap of people want to hire them because they know these people have met standards in the international world. Excuse me. These people had met standards for shipping. Some of these people can become surveyors, inspectors, international maritime captains, and on and on and on. Excuse me. So, when these people retire today, with no international certification, except they was on the Defense Force and they was a lieutenant commander or they was a captain or they was a, but see, first of all, they have no real experience in dealing with the IMO. You see, to become an officer of the watch and you serve on those commercial ships, you got to learn a lot about the IMO, because those ships are governed by all the IMO conventions. So you have to, that ship has to comply with SOLAS. And so you would have to be in and out of SOLAS to see what all you need to do to make sure the ship comply. MARPOL, STCW, load line, tonnage. It's so IOPP. It's so many things that you will learn in the commercial world in just being an officer in charge of navigation watch that you will not get on the Defense Force. That I'd go as far as saying it is pitiful that the Defense Force does not provide a pathway for its officers when they're making them officer in charge of a particular size vessel. Well, go and get your commercial certification for a ship that size first. And they do have commercial certification for ships under 3,000 gross tons as master, as mate, as officer of watch. And they do have certification for the engineering section. I talked with one of my friends after the show last week, and this chap, good friend of mine, very good friend of mine, he was a rating in the Defense Force, and he left at an early stage, and he went off to school, and he became he got his bachelor's in engineering, so he became a certified engineer, and he understands now how important it is for the Royal Bahamas Defense Force to have certified engineers as engineering officers. Engineers that would understand not only how to fix a machinery, but how the systems in the engine space and on board that ship works. And to the extent that they study these things, and they can detect and pick up and they can have proper management systems for all of these systems, like your freshwater system, your firefighting system, your bilge water system. And I'm no engineer, but I've been in the commercial world, so I know about these things. I was a ship inspector. I know about oily water separator and why that's so important in shipping, and that no pipe should be leading out into the sea, but they could pump directly from inside the ship, and all the rest of that. And then you have systems for lube oil, you have systems for fuel, you have systems for so many different things to do with that ship, right? And so when you serve on these commercial ships as an engineering officer of the watch, or second engineer, or chief engineer, you have to go in the classroom at a certain time doing these things. You have to serve on ship in the capacity in order to get promoted to the next level. So you ain't dealing with no choky fellas who was a mechanic somewhere and now they are engineer on your ship. And don't get me wrong now, because I can tell you, I have utmost respect for a lot of chief engineers, although there were ratings on those Defense Force vessels. And I can call names because there's plenty of them. Those guys were very good. But if given the opportunity to sail on commercial ships as engineering officers or even engineering ratings, their view on managing the engineering on a vessel would have been that much more elevated. Because when you're in the real world in shipping, very, very seldom your ship breaks down. You don't ever hardly see commercial ships out there breaking down unless something, they had a faulty engine, or because they got to maintain those things based on the buck. Because they're going to have a surveyor who's a very expert engineer, who served on ships as engineers for years, and chief engineer, he's going to come and he's going to be auditing your, we call it not auditing, you call it when you have survey, he's going to be surveying your engine spaces and your machinery. And he knows more about them things than you. And he's going to ask you, open this up, let me check for pitting, let me check to see when last did you grease this down, right? When last did you change this part here? When last did you inspect that part? Let me see your record. And they put you through the ringer. So as an engineer, to keep your what they call continuous survey machinery active and alive, you got to do a lot of things that they come in to check every year. You got to overhaul this. You got to change that. Oh, but ain't nothing wrong with that. No, the book say you change it after 3,000 hours. Change it. And if you didn't change it, you're going to be flagged and the ship will be detained and you can't move until you change it. And that's how the real world works. And if you get Defense Force personnel all in the engine space, understanding commercial maritime engineering, because they serve on commercial ships, they were given that opportunity while the pay continued to serve until they could qualify to be a chief engineer, and they come back in the system because they're always in and out of the system. Now you give people in service award to go to university for all kind of things except maintaining our boats and except driving our ships. Why aren't you going to give people in service award to certify as engineers and certify as deck officers and deck ratings and engineering ratings? Excuse me. Why should anybody in your force hold a position that they're not commercially certified for? If you're serious about having what we would consider the best little navy, and it ain't too late. We can start planning now. Because if you don't plan it, obviously you ain't serious. We can start planning now. Suppose, for example, you have a young chap that went to LJM, right? The Maritime School on Arawat Key. Or on Crystal Key, whatever that key name, but you got to go through Arawat Key. And that person goes out to sea at age 17, 18. And they serve as officer of watch. And then they become a chief mate 3 years later. And probably even a master mariner 5 years. So now they're 23. They're in 26 yet. They still could join the Defense Force as a Marine or as a Defense Force personnel coming into training. How are you going to attract that person to come into the force? Because now this person is more qualified than anybody you have in your force when it comes to maintenance of safety equipment, prevention pollution, and navigating ships. Right? Because they've been through the STCW requirements. They've been through SOLAS management. Something that people in the Defense Force don't get the opportunity to do because you're not sending them to the commercial world, to the maritime schools to do these things. So how are you going to track that person to come into the Defense Force? And you want to make the person a Marine seaman. You know, while I was at Dartmouth, I remember we had this chap. He was in what they call a merchant marine. They're RAF, that's what it is. It's the tankers and supply ships that sail with the military ships that have the missiles and stuff. And they supply vessels, they call them, right? RFA or RAF. And they need qualified commercial people because they're not military people. And so they have a master mariner on board, they would have a chief mate on board, they would have officer of watch on board. And we had, I remember a chap, he's like 24-25, he joined Dartmouth as a master mariner. And you know what they did with him? While he was in training wearing his blue shirt, he had stripes on his shoulder as a lieutenant. 2 bars. But yet, he really didn't know anything about the military. But they knew that they were bringing him in. But he was already at the level where he could navigate any of their ships because he's a master mariner. Although he was in training to learn how to become an officer, they had to lure him in, and he came in with the rank of lieutenant. Call it direct entry. But he earned that because he done prove himself in the commercial world. So what happens when we have somebody trying to get in the defense force at that capacity? You think we got to bring them in as a lieutenant? Should we bring them in as a lieutenant? Because you know what we used to call them in Dartmouth? It's unfortunate. We used to call him a plastic lieutenant. In other words, you were a lieutenant, but you don't know what it is to be a lieutenant. Yes, you know what it is to be a master mariner, but not a lieutenant. But very shortly after he passed out of Dartmouth, because Dartmouth trained him how to behave as an officer. And when he get on the ship, he knows how to salute, he knows how to drill, he knows all these things, and he already know the ship as far as navigating and taking care of safety equipment and all that type of stuff. So for that reason, he joined in, because the other guys would have joined. The thing about Dartmouth and we in the Bahamas, we cut ourselves short. When the British of our midshipman passes out of Dartmouth and he goes to wherever they put him to work, his place of study, this British chap is a full sub-lieutenant. And the same British chap who I do better than when I was at Dartmouth comes out as a sub-lieutenant, but I only come out as an acting sub-lieutenant. And that's another thing I couldn't understand. Why? Why, if I pass Dartmouth after year training, I can't have a full bar, why I have to have a half a bar? And then you got to wait to become a sub-lieutenant. And then you get that thing called junior grade lieutenant. See, they don't even have that in the Royal Navy. You can't be a 1.5 in the Royal Navy. You can't be a lieutenant junior grade. Or as we call it, a lieutenant. And then they will call the full 2 bars, instead of calling that a lieutenant, we call it senior lieutenant. But in the Royal Navy, that's just a lieutenant. You don't have no such thing as junior lieutenant and senior lieutenant. Because if you're a lieutenant, you're a lieutenant. If you're a sub-lieutenant, you're a sub-lieutenant. Now, what they do have, and this is worldwide, is lieutenant commander. But what they do not have is an acting lieutenant commander like we do in our defense force. A bunch of foolishness. You're an acting lieutenant commander, and lieutenant commander is like an acting commander. And then, of course, the next rank is commander. And in the Royal Navy, you go from commander to 4-ring cap. You go from 3-ring to 4-ring. You get a 3.5. You get a senior commander. And that's only placed in the defense force because we so cautious of our rank that me and you are commanders, but I won't make it look like I senior you. So they make me senior commander. And you just a commander. That's so foolish. And then you could become a captain. And do they have senior captains? I need to get senior captains. After captain is coming, all right. And we got some extra ranks in there. That's because people want to say they're a little better than that one there. But they really and truly, that make no sense, right? We need to fix that. Because people need to be respected for what the international ranks are. Do away with these little extra stuff we put there because we want to say, oh, it's the trajectory, you got more stuff. Come on, man. That don't make no sense. Don't look like we have no call tonight. Wonder why? Nobody want to talk about the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, the way we could improve it, blah, 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 blah. Numbers to call again on the show is 322-5477. This is Captain Glenn Bain. You're listening to Maritime Matters. Boy, and our time is running fast. You can also call us on 322-5683. At this stage, we move to our final break. And when we return, we're going to see what that 5 minutes brings us. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening.
At One-on-One Pharmacy, our friendly staff is ready to serve you. Visit us today for all your prescription and over-the-counter needs at our East Street South or Charles Saunders Highway locations. We're open Monday through Saturday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and from 9 to 4 on Sundays. In a rush? Send your refill scripts online at oneononepharmacy.com or ask about our convenient pickup service. One-on-One Pharmacy, providing personal health care with people at heart. At Bahamas Maritime Connection Limited, we offer first-class maritime security services throughout the Bahamas and the wider Caribbean. As experts in maritime security, we specialize in production of ISPS assessments and plans, verification audits, certified familiarization training, and port security consultancy, just to name a few. Our services also include provision of a security force to maintain all required ISPS facility security compliance. For all your maritime security needs, visit us today in Nassau at our East Street South location or in Freeport in the Kipling building. Call us at 392-3515 or follow us on all social media platforms. Bahamas Maritime Connection, your leader in maritime security. Let's help you make the connection.
Hey, guess what today is? Well, you know today is Tuesday. Oi! And it's time for Captain Glenn. Are you ready on? So everyone, let's gather around, cause Maritime Matters. He's a native of Andros. Say what? But he grew up in Nassau. Sail around the Bahamas, all around with the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. Hey, well you know today is Tuesday. Oh yeah,
Gentlemen,
and it's time for Captain
welcome
Glenn.
back.
It's ready, boy.
Maritime.
So everyone, let's gather around. You ready?
Matters.
Cause Maritime.
As you can see, we got 5 minutes left. That's it. 5 minutes. And the show will be over. So if you wish to call, you need to call now. Numbers 322-5477 and 322-5683. Anyone else can get you in, and we'd be happy to field your call. So we'll wrap up basically on what we covered today. You all don't seem to be that interested, or you're all less scared to call. I don't know. But we talk about how it all began. First of all, we talk about the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, from whence it came, and where we are now, and what we need to do to try and make it the best little navy, not in the world, but at least in the region, eh? So it began with Sir Lyndon Pillin deciding many countries in this region now have coast guards and defense forces, and we got all of this water to cover and protect, and we don't have none. So the decision was made that we will have a Royal Bahamas Defense Force. And of course, he brought in the professionals like William Swinley, like Derek Matthews, like Lieutenant Commander Sasson and Smith and North and Henderson and Darby Allen and all and Dillon and Bash and them. And then, of course, that was merged with the current officers of the Royal Bahamas Police Force Marine Division. Right? Mr. Lawrence Major, Leon Smith, and Amos Roll, and Bassett LaFleur, and Scotty Monroe, and the like. Right? Those would be the ones that stayed, minus, of course, Lawrence Major, the ones that stayed with the Royal Bahamas Defense Force from the Police Marines, and shaped it. And they did it along with those British compatriots. And then we started to bring in young people to sail on our ships, along with the veterans that were already there from the Police Marines. So we sent a handful of people off to Dartmouth. We started with Ken Turnquest and Peter Drudge. They were followed by Dawn Ware. Of Of course, he was followed by Roger Roll, Anthony Allens, and Godfrey Roll. And then we sent off Jackson Ritchie, Raymond Faxon, Wilfred Sands, and so on and so on. The numbers keep going down, right? And then they came to me eventually. And we would have had the raiding contingent that came from the Police Marines. I think that was spearheaded by David Duncombe, who quickly became a Force Chief Petty Officer. And then, of course, Peterson James, Paul Miller, and there was a lot more, Smitty and Bud, and there was a lot of the former police jug that became Defense Force Marines, and they led the way and assisted those young ones that were coming in for training and how to conduct themselves and how to do things on vessels and all the rest of that, right? And the Defense Force just continued to merge and grow from there. And then, of course, I don't want to talk too much about our plastic officers. We had some people who became officers, but they didn't do officers training. Then we had a group of people that it seemed to be a big push to get SD officers in the place, right? These were people that became ratings, that became senior rates, and they had very good potential, so they were given the opportunity to go off to Dartmouth and do a shortened course to become officers. And they did that. And some of them were very impacting, some of them were very good, some of them were very good friends of mine. And I can tell you they were very good at what they did. Then we would have had, instead of going directly to Dartmouth and learning to train over there, we would have people come in as cadets. And they would go through training in Nassau. And eventually, when the opportunity came for officers to go to Dartmouth, they would have gone to Dartmouth. And some of them came in just in time to go to Dartmouth. So they would do the rating training, and then they would be cadets. They would not be recruits. And then they would go on a ship as midshipmen until time to go to Dartmouth, and they would go to Dartmouth and do what they had to do. And as our time is gone, nobody wanted to call. I know you all can call me later, but that's all right. We'll talk about it, right? We talk a little bit about the nepotism and the favoritism, and can we reverse this situation so that we could have a better defense force, in particular when you deal with the engineering side of things? And I say yes. And there's a lot of things I didn't mention that I probably should have. How we could prepare our officers to be so much more impacting and more effective when they get out of the force. They would be so sought after. But this ain't the show for that. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been nice. I expected 1 or 2 calls. We didn't get no calls. I don't know how much y'all learned from my experience and what I see it as. I just hope that you would have taken something from it. And we will press on. I don't know what we can talk about next week, but we'll let you know in advance. So until then, I am Captain Glenn Bain. You are listening to Maritime Matters, our sponsors for the night show: 101 Pharmacy, Island Care Pharmacy, Bahamas Maritime Connection Limited. Good night, my anime, for the last time tonight. And you continue to move toward being 100 years old. You're done 93 and counting. And the producer for the night, of course, Mr. Kishno Jones. Thank you very much for controlling the wheels of steel. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for listening. And as always, we say Maritime Matters. Tick, 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 tick. Out.
I left my home in Georgia, headed for the Frisco Bay. I've had nothing to live for, look like nothing's gonna come my way. So I'm just gonna sit on the dock of the bay, watching the tide